Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Coin Republic podcast. My name is Shor Bacharya. One thing for sure, though, we love a little bit of blockchain drama. And for the past couple of years, we've interviewed so many founders. They have their version of stories. For those who don't know, we have had interviewed Yves Larose about a year ago, and we talked about about EOS.io reimagined with Yves Larose, and he did talk about his side of the story. But there are all sorts of controversies surrounding it, and we're gonna address that in today's podcast. I have the perfect person to talk about it. Uh, he is a senior project manager at Helios. So, what is Helios? It's a company owned by the one and only Brooke Pierce, and we're gonna have the both sides of the story over here, as well as trying to talk about what they are doing at the moment. Are they past EOS? Are they going to focus on other projects as well? Without a further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris Barnes, the Guardians of Helios.
Thanks for having me on, man.
So, what's the drama all about? People are aching to know what exactly happened with Brock and Yves. I was just watching this other interview where Brock was asked about a couple of comments he made against Yves. Why are they public enemies?
Well, Brock is I've been actually incredibly impressed with his ability to kind of forgive things and move on. So I don't think that Brock sees Yves as an enemy at all. I think Brock has the world, and I truly believe in Brock and worked for him for 2 years now. And I sincerely believe he wants a better play, and he's trying to do that. This was one ecosystem where people have their own versions of what they'd like to believe to be the truth. And EOS has had a difficult journey to now and certainly a lot of it was due to the unexpected success of the ICO that Block One came out with, right? So for EOS.io or the EOS token, it raised $1 billion. That was like far more successful than anyone anticipated on the team. It was success. It's still by orders of magnitude ever today. And so that created some issues. One of the big issues is it put a huge square in the middle of Block One from any regulatory agency looking to attack crypto. And as we see again, there's this legislation and unclear rule set, and we see what the SEC are doing, and clearly a bit of a background, like what the regulators are doing with chain. And that sucks for those of us who are in the industry and see the huge potential. Brock really sees that. And so back to Yves and Brock, I think the difference, Yves has used a lot of the hostility and resentment towards Block One and its founders to propel himself into a leadership position in the community. And not that those founded. I mean, to be clear, there are a lot of that I think a lot of us who are ICO participants as well didn't see what we wanted to see from Block One. I don't deny that things didn't go as we had hoped, but people are unwilling to accept that they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know how strict and how precarious things might have been from the regulatory system and how Block One had to be. So people aren't willing to kind of extend that level of or just understanding and maybe give the benefit of the doubt. Instead, they go into attack mode, and that's where the community still resides. We still get even from Yves talking about how opt out on Block One class action settlement to participate in one led by himself, or at least the ENF. I think it's murky how that's all going, but I think Yves definitely has part of his is to attack and demonize at Block One. And so maybe there's some enemy language there, but I know Brock doesn't see it that way. I think he'd rather we were all getting along. Even Helios, we're funded with the intention of being a VC strictly focused on EOS. And 2 years don't see any actual act from a from the ENF, which is the EOS network.
Hmm.
They have minted tokens, 68 million new EOS, fresh tokens, I don't know, maybe almost a year ago now. We haven't seen any public announcements of where it's gone and what projects have been incubated. We just recently heard those labs out of the East, and still clarity. And so in one hand, it's like the community wanted to shut off, and we can get into what happened, but they basically shut off the token supply to EOS as a VC, or to Helios as a VC contract. And instead, now 2 years later, we still don't have any activity. So it's too bad, because that's a lot.
I mean, I want to make sure that the people who don't know the story behind it, they have a timestamp around it. So could you explain what exactly happened? What will I From what I understand, Helios provided services to EOS exclusively, and now that you have ventured out to other like Telos and all of that. So I want to know about the exact story, what happened at what timestamp, for the people who are uninitiated, who don't know what happened.
Sure. So in November, roughly November of 2021, prior to that and earlier of 2021, there were basically from the network, we can call it the EOS network, that spearheaded by Eve, because the ENF was founded in, call it September, August of 2021. He needed to use a lot of the rhetoric that they were going to somehow fork B1 out. They wanted the IP from B1, which included like the Twitter handle, Post.io, and the GitHub repository, a few things that they wanted. And that didn't happen as the demands were set forward. And so the network froze out a vesting contract that was tied to the original launch of EOS. In the original code of EOS, there was a 10-year, 100 million token vest to E1 to provide. It was actually very ambiguous in terms of what it was actually for, but we can collectively say it was to support the network in keeping code updated or doing marketing or whatever. It was to like promote the network. However, just to keep in mind, B1 could never solely focus on only EOS. B1's main focus had to be EOS.io, the software, not EOS, the public, because that would turn EOS into security. No one wants that. So B1 had to be very careful with how they did things. And so regardless, the network decided the BPs decided to turn off that vesting contract. And prior to that, it was announced that Brock Pierce, basically being a co-founder of B1, essentially traded in his equity with B1 for those remaining 7-year vesting, that 7-year vest of EOS tokens. So that was essentially the deal that he made. A portion of that 7-year vest that was going to go to Helios, the entity that he created, that was going to be a VC solely focused on promoting and developing projects within the EOS system. Unambiguously was not about Telos or any of these other EOS.io instantiations. It was strictly EOS focused. Decided to freeze that and therefore cut off the supply of tokens to Helios before it could even get off the ground, essentially. So I was brought onto the team to be the manager, and we had done a really quick and quite good job. We had identified $500,000 worth of grants to be given out. Some of the recipients were even notified in advance before the freeze happened of those tokens, which was obviously not something planned to have happen. And yeah, so that's kind of the origin story of Helios, and because the tokens that can apply as a VC was tied up in that vesting contract, and the vesting contract was frozen, we had to really change our direction. And we tried to, so thereafter, we still ran an incubator program for free. Roughly 70 projects come through our program, and I think a lot of people really enjoyed that. It was basically a pitch deck workshop for projects to help develop their pitch deck so they can and seek funding. And so that was successful. We've done some marketing. And then later, just call it maybe 2 months ago, Brock finally came out with an announcement saying that he tried, like he paid for Helios and paid for incubators and paid for all that out of his pocket. Like there was no, and hoping to get some sort of like buy-in, we can say, from the EOS community to want Helios to be here, to want Brock to be involved. And time, the community seemed to not want us to be involved. They don't want Brock around. And I think a lot of that was spurred on by the kind of the mantra of Eve and the ENF, anti B1 and just a lot of negativity, a lot of toxicity. Those who know, they can read the chats. Telegram is the most active place for EOS chat. And it was pretty vicious to a lot of the founders. I received a lot of flack because I'm a representative was a puppet of Brock and Brendan Bloomer. Meanwhile, I've always had the same opinion. I never agreed with legal action against B1. I always thought we should find a way to bring them to the table. They're still a huge capital giant. They still, like, there's still an opportunity there to have them so ecosystem. And even though things didn't go as we had planned and hoped from the beginning of the ICO and the beginning of the network, that doesn't mean we should close that door. That's always been my prerogative. However, so yeah, that's how it went. Brock finally said, you know what, sorry, we're going to move on and not focus on EOS anymore. And that's where we've done some work as Helios for other chains like Telos. And so now we're broader than that. Go ahead.
It's interesting that you mentioned Telos, because I was just revisiting the interview that I did with one of my colleagues did with Yves. EOS.io reimagined with Telos. So we actually had Douglas Horn, the chief architect of the Telos core developers. Yeah. So we had Douglas and Yves on that show. It was a fantastic one. I think that was around time when Yves came back to the board, I guess. Let's talk about Telos now. You are specifically focusing on that blockchain. Telos is lightning quick, scalable, one of the world's fastest EVM. If we compare it with various other layer 2 scaling solutions, where do you see Telos being in compared to L2 in the next 5 years?
Sure. Yeah. So just to go back to what happened was the EOS.io software stack that EOS uses and Telos uses, they use the same underlying software stack that Block One came out with. The public to that software stack had ceased. And so what happened was a collection of 4 chains that all were using software decided to pool some funds and form a coalition to keep iterating on this highly performant, as you mentioned, software. So that group now is known as Antelope. So software is in fact called Antelope.io or Antelope.io. I don't know if there's a dot, but so EOS runs Antelope, not EOS.io. Telos runs Antelope, not EOS.io. And then of course, then there was Wax and the UX network. So these 4 networks came together, and that's where that conversation that you spoke about, they came together to work on the underlying software. But like the ecosystem or Tendermint or any of these things, you could have multiple chains that share an underlying code stack. One of the big differences, though, when you mention between Telos and say EOS, kind of fundamental, and that's the piece, right? So even though shared communities might share a software, it doesn't mean they share the same underlying governance principles. So select the top 20 most explicitly. And so in EOS, there's no restrictions. Anybody can spin up and register as a BP. There's what they call sock puppet block producers in the EOS ecosystem, where they're in the standby and they're not producing block, but they collect standby pay. And that allows them to basically have no intention of becoming a BP, but using the way the token vote aggregation has occurred on EOS to create sock puppets to further milk inflation, essentially. Telos, that's not allowed. So one of the biggest things is Telos does not allow exchanges to vote for block producers on behalf of the token holder, their tokens on an exchange. EOS does not have that rule, and that has been very impactful in terms of governance on the EOS blockchain versus the Telos blockchain. EOS right now, about 20% of the total token supply is voting for block producers. They both use what's called delegated proof of stake. These token holders have to delegate their stake to a validator or a block producer to then produce blocks and have the ability, 15 of 21 MSIG, to mint new tokens, to change specifics of the underlying code. I mean, especially minting new tokens. So only 20% of the tokens on EOS are actually having a voice, and the vast majority of those are from exchanges. And one is BitThumb, actually has a central, this guy named Tony, he actually orders their votes from BitThumb to who will pay the most BPs. Essentially commoditizing the vote. It becomes a race to the bottom. Which BP is willing to those votes? Not to the network, not actually try to grow the ecosystem, both in utility and user base, just remit the most return to the vote broker. That's a race to the bottom. I think it's like viral, and many of us see this. I'm not alone in this perspective. With Telos, they've excluded users from being able to do that, and you can see far greater token participation on Telos right now. So the total number of votes on Telos, I believe, is closer to like 40%, if not even 50%. And so that's a big difference, where you can see community engagement in Telos versus EOS. And that's where me personally, and not so much Brock hasn't said, hey, we want you to work on Telos. Brock has he's not a micromanager. He's a pretty cool guy that way and a great guy to work for. He sees what we're doing. He trusts that we're making good, honest, ethical decisions. We've gone, myself, the team at Helios, to focus on Telos. We see something there. It was the first EOS.io network chain to have EVM, and it is still one of the fastest EVM on the market, especially the third-party validated testing results from Baylor University in Texas. They validated at 15,000 transactions per second and over 1,800 swaps per second. So of the metrics that matter, Telos EVM is far and away blowing the competition out of the water. And so to answer your question, where does it compare to other well, it's an L1, actually trying to position itself as an L0. If performance matters, and it should, and if we get into this discussion about usability of blockchain and the user experience, users are going to care if they're waiting for a transaction and they have to wait for confirmation time, or they have to, good luck doing DeFi on even Ethereum. It's brutal in terms of transaction cost and transaction speed. It's forcing things to another layer, a roll-up solution or an L2 solution for Ethereum. Telos won't require that. So I think where Telos ends up in the next 5 years is gathering a lot more market share and traction. And we saw even GameStop recently chose to partner with Telos in terms of its player. I mean, it looks like that's kind of fallen apart. But initially, when they had before their CEO change at GameStop, it looks like some change in direction had taken place. But prior to that, they did their due diligence and they chose to select Telos. And there's a reason for that.
Well, let's expand on Analog Leap a little bit. So Analog Leap 5.0 upgrade paves the way for EOS to transition from, I think, DPoS to community-led vision. What changes will it bring to overall ecosystem in EOS, do you think?
Well, so this is, again, Antelope and Leap 5.0 is something that will to apply to all of the blockchains that choose to use that software. So this will actually change and affect Telos. It will affect EOS. It will affect any chain that chooses to adopt it. What it could do, so one of the biggest things that it's just two big pieces. One is the instant finality. So finality on EOS.io Antelope is quite slow. It's actually probably the one technological aspect of the chain. It's about 180 seconds to finality. It's like 99.999% final prior to that, but 100% doesn't occur until about 180 seconds. That's actually quite slow, even though the block time is half a second. Right? So if you're social media app or whatever, and you click a button and that button's to trigger something on it, you get immediate feedback that it had the thumb up. It was a social media app, for example. You don't have to wait for that. However, it's not. This is now going to, this Leap 5.0 going to make that finality, I think, in the range of 2 to 3 seconds, much faster than 80 seconds. One piece that all of these chains will equally share. The other piece that's being brought in to underlying consensus mechanism being upgraded to no longer be just straight delegated proof of stake or DPoS, but it's actually using you remember Facebook chain that they were working on? So that used this consensus mechanism called hot stuff. And so that consensus mechanism is baked into this new Leap 5.0 upgrade. And what that then allows for is the kind of, you can call it the jobs or the roles of a block, from one singular job producing blocks in sequence to now having 3 separate potential jobs. And all those jobs work together, 3 separate jobs, to produce blocks and then allow for much quicker finality. So how you select for those 3 particular jobs, that now creates an opportunity to introduce more mechanisms for consensus. You could just leave all 3 jobs within the top 21 block producers, which is what all these chains will do at first without introducing too much. But what it could allow for is you could have DPoS to select one of the roles. You could have proof of human, sort of human selection consensus mechanism, that humans into the fray to select for another, or proof of or proof of capacity or proof of work, or name your consent mechanism that you like. And you can now overlay those mechanisms on top of each other and have this sort of best of many worlds. And it removes Pareto distribution, which we see in current proof of stake and delegated proof of stake, in other ways. So that's what's possible. It's a huge improvement as far as governance is concerned, if it's leveraged to actually empower the community. I think one of the things we often, what is gripe I have with EOS, for example, is it's not really a community-led chain. We hear the community took over, and this is one of the lines we've heard from Eve and the ENF, that the community is researched, kicked out P1, and we've taken over the chain. It's like, no, the 20% of the tokens did that, and most of those tokens live on an exchange, held by a couple brokers. You've got a couple cronies who have taken over the chain in the guise of the community. But meanwhile, what do you need in a blockchain? In delegated proof of stake, it should be the token holder. If 80% of the token holders choose not to vote, it sucks, and that's the community's fault, and clearly they're not expressing. But one of the things that, especially BitThumb, because they're out of Korea has this thing called the travel law, and it's actually really difficult for regular individuals to see. So this has been, and there's a lot of tokens in Korea on EOS. Not voting unless it's through a broker like BitThumb and through this Tony character. So that's actually, the community isn't expressing their voice. And this new LEAP 5.0 maybe creates more opportunities if the status quo, those who are in power, if they choose to open up the gate, so to speak, of power to the actual community, then they have an opportunity to do so. I personally expect that I will believe it when I see it, because I think those who are in power like power, and especially when they're able to manipulate token supply, as we've seen, that's a people don't often want to give up. Telos, I think will be more likely to see utilization of this kind of split opportunity for different disparate mechanisms of consensus. I expect Telos to be far more likely and willing to experiment and try to really give even more power to because it is more community and there's far more activity in the chat from what I can see. So it'd be really interesting, but it creates equal opportunity on all sides. I'm skeptical that will change with the.
I have a hunch this podcast might go viral on Wall Street Bet subreddit now that you've mentioned GameStop twice and community at least 3-4 times. So let's have a couple of questions surrounding around the gaming community and Web3, right? Decentralized identity, right? DID is something which various game developers are trying to incorporate. What are your thoughts on it? And do you see DID as a way to increase the privacy and give a better control thoughts on that?
I see decentralized identity more beneficial to the game developers at first. And the reason why is a lot of games have a bot problem. And if there's actual value to be real value to be generated from gameplay. And that's kind of what Web3 gaming is all about, right? It's about giving power to the player, as is a GameStop phrase, but it's the ability to now actually own game assets. So the whole, I find I still don't get what this means, and it's not that complicated. It just means that when my son plays Fortnite, much to my chagrin, it's just such a waste of time, but regardless, he's a person I let him play. So the skins industry is a $50 billion a year industry, just buying skins. And Fortnite's a great example. Kids will go on, and like I played Warcraft for a little while, and I quit because I realized how much time in my life, but to those who play it, it's fun, it's enjoyable. But in Warcraft, you get different in-game items, and they actually have utility value. So it changes the way and the items can work together and create like, so there's like utility value to the actual in-game item. Fortnite, it's just a skin. There's no utility, it's just aesthetic. And grown-ups alike will buy skins, and it's a $1 billion a year industry. It's a huge industry. And you don't own that as a user. It's tied to your account, which is owned in Fortnite's example by Epic Games. Epic Games owns those assets. And if you sell those assets in the secondary market, that is violating their terms of services. So you could have, people still do it, and they find there's deals, but it's not. It's deliberate, and you risk losing the account and losing access to these items. So the whole point being, you don't own the items even though you pay for them. Web3 changes that dynamic. Web3 says you can now buy the item. The item is tied to an NFT, a non-fungible token that lives on a blockchain like Telos, for example. And when you log into the game, it's going to query your account. So you have a little step of tying the blockchain wallet. We'll get into this, the usability and how this is, like, why it's still complicated. It's easy enough. You log in, and now your login is tied to your on-chain wallet. That in terms of, like, as the user, you don't have to care about anything Web3, and it see is all of your items now listed in the inventory that you own. And what you can do with those now is actually sell them on a marketplace or rent them on a rental platform, or give them to us you want to have them legally with the game. What that does is it offloads the responsibility of asset ownership from the game developer, because that's one thing they don't want to do. And an issue with a lot of game developers, if they start game items and there's an economy between those game items, that if there's money transiting, that's like transfer licenses, as if you're an actual game developer. That's something you do not want to get into. But they can offload that by just saying, look, you own the item, it lives on a blockchain, we're not responsible, we're not custodying these items anymore, they're yours. And you then deal with these third-party products that will be like a DEX, for example, to sell in-game items, or, like I say, to rent them. And that's now creating value for the player that they get to keep. It's value that I get to have possession of. And that's totally different than the Web2 experience we have today. So that's where this is going. And that's where I think that what GameStop, it turns out they've discontinued the service of their Web3 wallet. I think maybe they must be getting some sort of cold feet about just the regulation and not wanting to get trapped in that. And again, that speaks to just this unfortunate situation of the regulatory environment, where users and the advancement of these gaming ecosystems, the potentiality here is kind of being taken away. But hopefully we get through it and they persist, and the Web3 game developers start to lead the way, or better still, Web2 game developers start to recognize the opportunity here and start to create digital in-game. Like, there is some rumors that GTA, the next Grand Theft Auto, is going to actually have NFT-backed items. Like, they're getting this story. It's going to happen. The first big game series that do this, they're going to see an influx of users, because the users are now saying, hey, I'm going to play a game. It's going to take, a lot of time is lost, but now I actually get value that's not breaking the terms of services. And I actually get to, like, monetize my gameplay. That's huge. That's where this is going to go.
So on that note, various gaming platforms are currently raising millions of dollars, with their major focus being money rather than development or user experience, right? So as one of the biggest incubators out there, what suggestions do you have for Web3 developers?
Raise the money. That's awesome. Raise the money, but then take that money and build an easy user onboarding experience. Like, that's the key. In order for Web3 gaming to make it, or any emergent technology, change is hard, right? Humans suck at change. Absolutely. So we now have finally gotten over the internet hurdle. Those who are old as I am, who remember what it was like in the early mid 90s and what the internet was like. And there was friction. There was a lot of naysayers who thought it wasn't going to do anything. It was only useful for porn and the anarchist cookbook. And now the internet is everything. I mean, our entire modern life is centered around this seemingly nascent technology. Blockchain is no different. I had a conversation. There was a tweet I had that Max Kaiser, it was an interview I did with another gentleman, and we were talking about this Web3 gaming and how in-game assets will live on a blockchain. And I tagged Max Kaiser in a tweet, and he basically quote tweeted that I was a Bitcoiner who deserves to rot in hell along with John McAfee. And it was funny. I mean, I was quite flattered that he quote tweeted me. I got like 75,000 impressions on that tweet. And it's like these Bitcoin, they have like that blockchain is a technology. Bitcoin is just the association of that technology. If you believe in all of the aspects of property value or property rights and disintermediation, removing the middleman and trustless nature of things, those aspects, those value propositions that apply to Bitcoin, wherever it is here, also apply to other assets. I mean, so if you can't just, money can benefit from the value proposition of blockchain. In-game items for gamers can benefit from that. If I want that sorts of things that maybe can remove the need for more lawyers, and we utilize leaks, and we can do keys that can be transferred in deeds, and sorts of things that can benefit from the value prop of blockchain. These Bitcoin maxis, they kind of seem like they haven't got, but we're going to get there. So back to your question, developers who are capital, use that capital to then create an onboarding experience that doesn't feel any different than regular Web 2, whatever it is you're trying to do. If it's gaming, then make it simple. Use the Google Auth for logging in, and make the wallet really simple. That's what we're missing. It's too complicated. People don't want to have to learn a thing to try a new game. It's a click, just like I did before, generated a, it's, I choose to interact with the marketplace now. Maybe there's a separate little tutorial now used to take those and start to interact with them as you would with a regular NFT. And those of us in crypto kind of understand how that works. Make it optional, make it mandatory, and then create, if it is an option, make a little pathway that can allow users to then benefit from the Web3 aspects of what you made. Make that first and foremost. Make it as simple and as close to Web 2 as you can. Make the UX, I mean, that is first and foremost always what's the most important. Is what's the user experience? Is it a fun game? Make the game fun first. Don't make it all about that shit. Just make a fun game. Slowly start to bring in these other pieces. And once users start to realize they can monetize play and there's actual value to be generated, well then I have to go, oh, and I never finished the DID question. What's going to happen there is bots. If there's value and money to be generated in game assets, the game developers are going to have to deal with how do you prevent bots from capturing all that value. So a great example is like a resource generative type game. You mine some gold, some wood, or whatever it is. These resources you use to build your house and to build your citadel or whatever you're going to do, right? If bots are able to flood in, and one person could have a Sybil attack. I could have thousands of accounts mining and extracting these resources. Or like I'm basically going to kind of disrupt what would be a normal gaming experience. Attach a decentralized identity to an account and say I participate in some sort of you want to have a decentralized, the first D. You don't want to use KYC and government ID and have that. You know, we're third party. There's some really good clever in the EOS community, and they do a simultaneous video call, part of an election process. But participants show up on a video call at once. We break into little rooms to have a discussion, but that means we're all unique humans at one point in time having a synchronous call. So I can't be in two calls at once. By my participation, my singular account, and I receive a non-transferable token, like a soulbound token or an NTT that's now attached to my wallet, attached to my account. I log into the game with that account. That account sees that I have this particular token that says, oh, this is a unique human because he participated in this game. Basically, it's like a video game, you can call it, like a synchronous video call game. And now I'm going to give them
a quick follow-up questions on that. Soulbound tokens, do they exist? I thought the people are like working on it at this moment. Is it practically being used?
Yeah. It just means it's just another way of saying non-transferable token. It's just basically soulbound token is just a gimmick. I mean, it's like you create an on-chain wallet, an on-chain account. You could argue it's connected to it's my soul, but it's not. It's just an account. I can make multiple accounts. But when you do is you can send an account non-transferable token, meaning I can't send it to another account. So it just means that it's a soul bound. It's bound to that particular account. And if that account is like Chris Barnes, I want to be able to play a game and maximize because that game is saying, hey, I have this particular bound token or non-transferable token, we're going to give you a bonus on the resource generation because we know you're a real human.
So entities are widely used in the EOS community, you're saying, for verification?
They're not widely used, but the is there, yeah. Both Telos and EOS have the ability to have non-transferable tokens. Yeah, it's nothing new. It's encourage them, and then how you encourage other game developers or other developers query tables that token on one's account to then give them special benefits. We've seen that come together yet, but it's absolutely possible.
Fantastic. Final question. How can one ensure the scalability of a Web3, Web3 gaming ecosystem, considering the limitations of blockchain like complexity for a common user and immutability?
Make it as close to as possible. The longevity about this is not trying to create something that everyone needs to learn and become. It's just not going to happen. We want this to be as simple as possible, and it needs to be as close to what we're currently familiar with. So we see that with the transition from, say, Web2 finance to DeFi. Like there's a lot of learning that has to be there, and that creates a lot of friction for new user onboard. If we want blockchain to have curve, like we're still at the bottom, we're still early. Most people aren't really using blockchain. There's been no killer app. Bitcoin as money has been the only really app, and even they're not using it as money. It's not transactional. I mean, it's not seemingly built UI, and it's too slow. The throughput is too slow. Regardless, in order for this to be simple and to have staying power, it needs to be simple. People need to go back to the basics, read more about what app, and it was all about baseline, simple UI. User experience is everything. It needs to be as simple as possible. And that's where we're getting hung up. It's too complicated. Creating a wallet, seed phrases, long 6-character hexadecimal, blah. What does all that mean? Like one of the is actually was really good when EOS.io was first by Dan Larimer and Block One, is they used human readable account names. That was like transformative at the time. So I have an account, Chris Barnes. Like you could have account Seraph. Like you could pick real words to actually be your account. It used to just be like, know what a Bitcoin account looks like. I mean, good luck. It's just blah, 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 right? So little things like that just going to make it like a real, regular, familiar experience. We need to remember humans are the ones that matter here, not necessarily this technology. People get to the tech. It's like, yeah, but get used. So we back to fundamentals, simple and easy to use as possible, and masses flood in. And that's what's going to happen with gaming. That my true belief is that gaming is going to be the big wave of it in block, and it's going to be because people start to monetize their in-game efforts. Gaming is so popular. There's 3 billion gamers in the world. Once they realize the way that they realize that playing the games they love, because those games decided to incorporate gameplay, that's going to create the flood. But to happen, those games that integrate the NFTs have to in a way that's simple and blind. And smart people will make that happen, I'm sure.
Fantastic, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Barnes from Helios. Send Helios some love. And if you're part of the community, make sure you love us, subscribe, and share. No Wall Street bet trolls were harmed on this podcast. I just quick disclaimer. Okay. I think this episode is going to come on a full circle. We've interviewed Yves. We've interviewed Douglas. We've interviewed you. Once we have Mr. Brock on the show, it's going to come full circle. We're working on that. We're probably going to have him soon. So, ladies and gentlemen, love you all. See you on the other side. And